Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're really digging into a pretty comprehensive stack of sources you sent us,
Yes, quite a collection.
all focused on, well, this intricate and, frankly, escalating web of global geopolitical risks. We've got articles, research papers, even some really interesting online discussions.
Mm-hmm.
And they all seem to paint a picture of a world grappling with intensifying conflicts, some major shifts in energy dynamics, and this looming shadow of nuclear proliferation.
It's quite the landscape.
So our mission today is basically to cut through some of that noise. We want to help you identify the most critical insights from all this material.
And connect the dots.
Exactly. Connect the dots in a way that makes sense. Think of this as your essential shortcut to understanding the complex forces reshaping global stability right now.
Right. And what's truly striking, I think, in this material is just how interconnected these challenges really are.
Yeah.
We're talking everything from these sort of regional flashpoints to global economic tremors. And underpinning a lot of it is the critical role of energy security.
Absolutely.
So our deep dive today will zoom in on the primary risks, try to shed light on the key players involved, and then explore the potential implications for economies, for national security, especially for the United States.
Okay, let's start with one of the big concepts that kept popping up in the sources. This idea of an axis of aggressors.
Mm-hmm.
That's the term some U.S. officials are using. It refers to this perceived strengthening alliance between China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea.
That quartet, yes.
They're reportedly not just boosting their own nuclear capabilities, but also forging closer military, economic, and political ties. So the sources really dig into the why now. What's driving this convergence at this specific moment?
That's a crucial question, and the sources do offer some compelling perspectives. You have experts like Secretary of Defense Peter B. Hegseth, Brandy Vann from the ODNI, that's the Office of the Director of National Intelligence.
Right.
And they articulate what seems to be a bipartisan view. They're saying this kind of cooperative approach by these states, it's fundamentally undermining U.S. influence around the world.
Undermining influence.
Yes. And what's particularly concerning to them, and it's a theme across these sources, is the increased possibility of simultaneous conflicts
Simultaneous.
with multiple nuclear-armed adversaries. So it's not just about one threat anymore. It's about a potentially synchronized challenge. And that, they argue, demands a pretty radical reassessment of current defense strategies.
That makes sense. A multi-front challenge. So if this really is an axis,
Yeah.
how are their nuclear arsenals evolving based on what we've read? Let's start with China.
Well, the material indicates China is rapidly expanding and modernizing its nuclear posture. This isn't just slow growth.
No.
We're seeing estimates that its arsenal could hit at least 1,000 weapons by 2030. Some projections go even higher, maybe 1,550 warheads.
Wow.
And the ODNI's 2025 assessment, it explicitly states China's nuclear weapons pose a, quote, direct threat to the homeland. That kind of increase, it fundamentally shifts the global nuclear balance. We're moving from a historically bipolar U.S.-Russia dynamic to something more complex, a tripolar competition, perhaps.
A huge shift. And Russia, of course, always a major nuclear player. What do the sources say about their current role in all this?
Well, Russia still has the largest and most diverse nuclear stockpile globally. According to the 2022 Nuclear Posture Review, Moscow views these weapons essentially as a shield for its, well, aggressive foreign policy.
Right. Allows them freedom of action.
Exactly. But what's equally concerning in these sources is the reported assistance Moscow is giving to others.
Like who?
They highlight Russia helping China expand its nuclear weapons program and offering help to North Korea to improve its missile delivery systems. And on top of that, Russia seems pretty set against renewing the New START treaty when it expires in February 2026. That just further chips away at arms control frameworks.
Okay, and then North Korea, always in the headlines, it seems, with their nuclear ambitions. What's the latest from the sources on Kim Jong-un's program?
Kim Jong-un's commitment to expanding North Korea's nuclear arsenal seems absolute. It's really the centerpiece of their national security strategy. Researchers from FAS, that's the Federation of American Scientists, they estimate North Korea has likely put together around 50 nuclear weapons already.
50.
With the potential, they say, to build maybe 90 more. So that suggests a pretty significant and rapidly growing threat there.
And finally, Iran. Not nuclear armed yet, but the sources paint a picture of them being very close.
Yes. While they haven't crossed that threshold, the sources are quite clear clear, Iran has significantly ramped up uranium enrichment.
How much?
They could potentially produce enough enriched uranium for up to 21 nuclear weapons in as little as 5 months.
5 months? That's fast.
It is. And U.S. intelligence apparently suggests Iran carried out weaponization-related activities in 2024. There might even be a dedicated team working to shorten the path to a deliverable weapon, so it's not just about the fuel, it's the whole package.
What really stands out, and it's concerning, is the reported cooperation on nuclear matters between these states. It's not just 4 separate programs, is it?
Precisely. It's the network effect. The sources detail things like Russia shipping enriched uranium fuel to China for a fast breeder reactor. That reactor type is very efficient at producing plutonium.
Which is key for weapons.
Exactly. Key ingredient. There's also evidence suggesting North Korea and Iran used similar enrichment equipment, sourced from the AQCON network. And while it's unconfirmed, there are persistent reports of direct nuclear cooperation between them.
And it goes both ways.
It seems so. As Iran and North Korea give military support to Russia in Ukraine, Moscow is reportedly helping North Korea with its missile tech. And there are serious concerns Russia might aid Iran's weaponization efforts, too. This interconnectedness, it genuinely creates a more dangerous, less predictable world.
That interconnectedness is painfully clear in the Middle East right now. Our sources highlight these recent, overt military strikes between Israel and Iran. That feels like a dramatic shift.
It is. A worrying shift away from their long-standing shadow war. It represents a significant escalation in an already incredibly volatile region.
So what are the real stakes here, according to the analysis, beyond just the immediate tit-for-tat?
Well, this raises a really important question. What are the broader ripple effects if this spirals? RAND experts, who are cited quite a bit in the materials,
Yes, I saw that.
they note this conflict risks a nuclearized Middle East. The fear is that Israeli actions could actually harden Iran's resolve to go for the bomb, maybe even speed up their timeline.
And Iran has options for responding, right?
Many options. Leveraging proxies like the Houthis, using their large missile arsenal, employing asymmetric tools, cyber attacks, sabotage, even terrorism. The sources warn that something like an Iran-backed cyber attack in North America, or maybe an attack on a U.S. ship or a NATO base, that could trigger a much wider response. Hard to predict where it leads.
And this is where it gets, frankly, quite alarming in the readings. The sources warn about a high risk of this conflict spiraling much further.
Beyond the region.
Yeah. Potentially drawing in other nuclear powers, like India and Pakistan, who have their own issues, and even potentially China, making a move on Taiwan if the U.S. military gets heavily bogged down elsewhere.
That linkage is made explicit in some sources.
It is. One source even calls the Israeli-Palestinian conflict escalation one of the top 3 potential triggers for a World War III, right alongside Ukraine and Taiwan. It just shows how fragile things feel globally.
And if we connect this back to the bigger picture, this kind of conflict in the Middle East inevitably has significant economic consequences, particularly for global energy markets.
Right, oil prices and supply.
It's not just a security issue over there, it quickly becomes a global economic one.
So for you listening at home, this could mean higher gas prices for a period, as one of the online discussions put it, similar to past spikes.
That's the immediate, tangible impact for many.
But the core concern the sources raise is if Iran were to attack, say, Gulf Arab oil facilities or try to block the Strait of Hormuz, that's that critical choke point for oil.
Absolutely vital.
If that happens, the sources warn, big energy price hikes aren't just an inconvenience. They could actually trigger a global recession or even depression.
And you have to remember the scale here. The world uses over 100 million barrels of oil every single day. Demand is currently growing, especially with Asia expanding and China reopening.
So the market's already tight.
Exactly. And then you have recent OPEC Plus decisions to cut production, even with tight supply. That already pushed oil over $80 a barrel. It creates huge uncertainty for economies already worried about recession and energy inflation.
So maintaining energy security, which the sources define as adequate supply at affordable prices, that gets really tough.
Extremely challenging with less supply and more geopolitical risk.
And Russia.
Yeah.
Despite sanctions, they're still a major player, right?
Yes, they're still producing and exporting oil, often at discounts to places like Turkey, Singapore, China, India. But there's a long-term worry highlighted in the sources. The lack of Western investment in Russia's energy infrastructure because of sanctions, that could really impact future global supply down the road, no matter what happens tomorrow. It's a structural issue.
Okay, shifting gears slightly, but still related, great power competition. Taiwan comes up constantly in these sources.
Consistently identified as the likeliest potential flashpoint in U.S.-China relations. China sees Taiwan as a breakaway territory to be unified, using force if they deem it necessary.
And the risk for the U.S.
The risk is being drawn into what the sources call a massively destructive and costly war with China. The implications are immense.
And it's not just geopolitics, is it? Taiwan's economy is critical.
Absolutely critical. World's top maker of advanced semiconductor chips. Any conflict or even serious instability in the Taiwan Strait would send massive shockwaves through the global economy. Almost every industry relies on those chips. Your phone, cars, military tech, everything.
Okay, let's look at Europe. Russia is clearly seen as the main threat to NATO now.
Unequivocally, the sources state Russia is the main security threat. And this has forced a pretty significant shift in NATO strategy. More towards robust deterrence and defense, less focus on crisis management outside its borders.
And we saw that with that big exercise.
Steadfast Defender 24, exactly. NATO's largest military exercise since the Cold War. 90,000 troops across Europe. They were training for large-scale war, rapid reinforcement. The scenarios were clearly designed with potential Russian aggression in mind. It's a very clear signal of heightened readiness.
Something else the sources brought up was this concept of a non-proliferation chilling effect. Can you unpack that?
Yeah, it's a really profound idea. It suggests that countries without nuclear weapons might look at the current global situation and decide that non-proliferation efforts, or relying on international norms, actually carry more risk than reward for them.
So they might be tempted to build their own bombs.
Potentially. The sources point to Ukraine giving up its Soviet nukes and then being attacked later. That experience might strongly discourage states like Iran or North Korea from ever disarming. And it could even push others, maybe South Korea is mentioned, to think about getting their own nuclear deterrent. It really shifts the security calculation for non-nuclear states.
And related to that, how are Russia and China reacting to actions against, say, Iran's program?
Well, they've condemned U.S. actions, like potential strikes on Iranian nuclear sites, calling them unjustified and unprovoked. They warn about broader conflict, but also frame it as setting a bad precedent against international law. So you had this clash of interpretations about international norms playing out.
Bringing it closer to home, what about direct threats to the U.S. homeland mentioned in the sources?
Well, beyond the sort of traditional concerns about transnational criminal groups or terrorists, the sources highlight the rapid growth of tech-advanced cyber tools, drones creating new ways to attack.
New vectors.
Exactly. And there's also a specific mention of a real threat to U.S. military personnel and assets stationed in the Middle East, which, if these conflicts really escalate, has led to some discussion, even mentioned in the source material, about a potential military draft in the U.S.
Wow. That's a sobering thought, these distant conflicts potentially having that kind of direct impact here.
It really brings it home.
So, given this really complex, challenging picture, what do the sources suggest as pathways forward? What can be done?
Well, the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, the FDD, features prominently here with several policy recommendations. They're aimed at boosting American deterrence and strengthening alliances in this tricky environment. They definitely advocate a proactive stance.
And these are pretty specific recommendations, right?
They are. For instance, urging the Trump administration to produce a 2025 nuclear posture review specifically designed to ensure the U.S. arsenal can deter and counter this perceived Axis threat.
And funding.
Yes, urging Congress to fully fund and speed up the modernization of the entire U.S. nuclear triad land, sea, and air capabilities. The idea is ensuring overwhelming strength.
What about allies?
That's critical, too. Shoring up U.S. extended nuclear deterrence commitments to key NATO members and Asian allies, Canada, Japan, South Korea, are mentioned. Experts quoted emphasize not making premature U.S. military withdrawals, as that could actually incentivize allies to seek their own nukes.
So presence equals stability in that view.
That's the underlying message, yes. American presence provides a security umbrella.
And finally, regarding Iran specifically.
The sources stress taking all necessary measures to ensure Iran does not acquire a nuclear weapon. This involves using the full spectrum of American power: diplomacy, maximum pressure sanctions, cyber sabotage, and even military action as a last resort.
And there was a big defense initiative mentioned.
Yes, a significant recommendation highlighted is for Congress to fund President Trump's proposed multi-layered missile defense system, dubbed the Golden Dome. It's expected to cost over $175 billion, with the ambitious goal of being operational before 2028. It's about creating a shield against growing missile threats.
So, wow, we've covered a huge amount of ground today.
We certainly have.
From this concept of an axis of aggressors and their nuclear plans to the escalating Israel-Iran conflict and its ripple effects on energy and the global economy.
Yeah.
Plus, the intensified great power competition and this real focus on needing a robust defense strategy.
What's truly striking, as we said at the start, is just the sheer scale and the interconnectedness of it all. It really underscores that global security needs constant vigilance, strategic thinking, and a proactive approach to deterrence.
Yeah, this deep dive definitely reveals a world where the future of energy, global stability, even the pace of technology, it's all tangled up with these geopolitical tensions. It's like a complex tapestry. Pulling one thread affects the whole thing.
Which leaves us with a really important question, I think. How will nations navigate this incredibly delicate balance between deterrence, showing strength, and de-escalation, avoiding catastrophe in what feels like an increasingly unpredictable environment? What compromises might be needed, or what bold new strategies might emerge?
That is definitely something for you to mull over as you digest all this. What new forms of diplomacy, perhaps, or maybe what technological innovations might arise as a direct response to these really pressing global realities? Could they push us forward instead of pulling us back into conflict?
A question for the future.
Indeed. Join us next time on The Deep Dive for another journey into the sources shaping our complex world.